Welcome to Transforming Us podcast. I'm Jess.
And I'm Tamara. We're trauma-informed relationship coaches and old friends here to discuss common patterns and what leads us to paths of security.
You know, people are feeling overwhelmed and disconnected in their painful relationships, which often leads to mental health crises.
We want to share some new ideas and practices to help you cultivate curiosity, compassion, and to redeem the patterns in your relationships, starting with yourself.
Join us on this journey of transforming us. Grab a cup of coffee and let's dive in. Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. I want to let you know how grateful I am that you are here today. I have loved just studying and learning even more about parts work. So today we're going to dive a little bit into the aspect of parts work that is touched by attachment theory. So how a vulnerable child develops parts to survive relational instability. Maybe how a vulnerable child develops parts to survive relational instability. We all have them. Our parents were not perfect and their parents were not perfect. And sometimes we're left alone in our emotional pain and the people tasked at caring for us just missed us. So these experiences can become parts that surface later in life. Remember our metaphor from the last episode where we talked about the chestnut seed and the prickly burr, the containing coat, and then the seeds within different parts for each Enneagram type, and then also within attachment theory. So a small child is biologically vulnerable. I think we can all agree that they are not designed to protect themselves. They needed protection. And so they can't survive without their caregiver. This is the basis for attachment theory. Having a bond with a caregiver is essential for survival. When that connection feels shaky, meaning they don't always have their cues responded to with attunement and care, the child's nervous system becomes dysregulated and they don't know what to expect always. So this is where sometimes parts can develop. Attachment is the root system that determines how much we trust the stability of our relationships. Insecure attachment is simply a collection of younger, protective, and hidden parts trying to find emotional safety where it wasn't guaranteed. So we've talked about the different attachment styles in previous episodes. I encourage you to go back and listen earlier in season 1 about, there's an attachment overview as well as individual episodes for each attachment style that's insecure. But there's dismissive avoidant, anxious preoccupied, and fearful avoidant. So when someone you love pulls away, does your internal system go into a panic or like a freeze? Do you find yourself working harder to make relationships work than maybe the other person is? This extra work makes sense if younger parts have to do adult jobs. If protecting and attuning, we might just be exhausted by all of it. So with anxious preoccupied attachment, which is kind of that pursuing pattern, we have the hardworking part. Again, this isn't cut and dry. Like I said in the last episode, I have not been formally trained in IFS or ego states, but more just an observer of my own life and of these systems, that I see some opportunity to look at the hardworking, the protective part, and the hidden parts of an anxious, preoccupied attacher. So the hardworking part is kind of that overfunctioner that is trying to be helpful and kind of, they don't want someone to leave them. So they're just trying to be extra good so that they can keep love and belonging. So this anxious preoccupied pattern also might develop protest behaviors. So this might be that prickly protector. It could be outbursts or clinging, maybe neediness. These are the less desirable sides of the anxious preoccupied attacher. When they get really scared, these spikes come out. And it might be trying to like force connection, if that makes sense. And so then what might be hidden in this pattern? The hidden parts. A younger part that feels fundamentally unworthy of someone staying, they're going to feel worthless, and just that worthlessness just gets hidden away. Maybe even an assertive part that uses their voice and stands up for what they need isn't always allowed, or they feel like it's bad. So then we have the dismissive avoidant attachment patterns. This is the one that typically withdraws the most consistently. They have a hardworking part that might be high achieving and hyper independent. It's kind of, I can do it myself. I don't really need anybody. I want to avoid disappointment. And so this is that hardworking part that just says, like, I'm just going to get it all done. I'm going to hold it all together and be unemotional. So then we all have these protective parts. So this dismissive avoidant pattern, their prickly protective parts could look like stonewalling or coldness, maybe over intellectualizing and preventing vulnerability, wanting to avoid that intrusion from others. So if maybe they had an anxious caregiver or somebody that kind of overwhelmed them, just cutting it off so that they are not affected. This is these protective parts. So what might be a hidden part that this person doesn't want to feel? They don't want to be. It could be a younger part whose needs were ignored, and now they believe that vulnerability and intimacy is just overwhelming. So could be that vulnerability was something they tried for a couple years when they were younger, and it just was never consistently attuned to, so they just cut it off and just said, I'm not going to allow myself to need others for my emotional things. So, and then the last one is our fearful avoidant attachment patterns. This kind of is what most would call that freeze experience of like, it's push pull. I really want connection, but I'm also afraid of it. So they kind of have this protector and earning parts that get kind of intertwined. It's really interesting. It's a bit chaotic. It's a mix of hypervigilance and hyper responsibility, and it could be some dissociation and definitely a lot of confusion for themselves and for others. But deep down, some of the hidden parts for this pattern is it might be viewing a caregiver as both the source of fear and also the source of needed connection. So I think that, like the other two attachment styles, having vulnerability was maybe not okay, but also assertiveness was not okay. They both got maybe punished for having a voice and then not having a voice. And so it's like there's really no safe place to land within yourself. Who am I? What do I need? It is very confusing. And oftentimes, more extreme types of trauma are associated with this pattern, significant things happening, whether it be addictions, abuse, maybe a tumultuous divorce in your story. Oftentimes it's pretty obvious there's some bigger things going on that create a lot more parts. And I think you're going to see a lot of parts with this type. So Dr. Allison Cook is the author of a book called The Best of You. She talks about focusing on how we can integrate these younger parts, survival-driven parts, into the leadership of our wise adult self. Okay, so self-leadership. I think maybe that's talked about by Dr. Richard Schwartz. What we talked about in the previous episode was this sense of stepping into security and God's love and wholeness. And so what we want to do is talk a little bit more about, what does secure attachment look like when you have all these parts going on? So for the anxious parts, we want to see them self-soothe and practice independence and not feel so abandoned when others aren't available to connect. For some of the dismissive patterns, we can reach for vulnerability and connection and risk rejection because we realize that we can also self-soothe when we need to. We learn to. But still trying to reach for that connection, even though there is a fear of maybe rejection. And then with the fearful patterns, relaxing. Okay, that hypervigilance needs to relax around any anxiety that we might be having around relationships, knowing that they could go up, they could go down, and learning self-soothing techniques and remembering God's soothing, His presence and His safety, and just trying to find ways and practices of actually experiencing that safety, and creating it for ourselves. Not that we're the ones that create our own safety, but putting ourselves into a position where we can feel and experience it. So like one example would be sitting by a stream. You can put yourself by a stream to hear it, to feel it, to pray, to experience the goodness and the peace of God. So in 1 John 4:18, it talks about perfect love casts out fear. So attachment wounds are truly really fear-based survival strategies, and earned security happens when the true self brings God's perfect love to those younger, fearful, and divided parts. So Ephesians 3:14-19, I talked about it in the last episode, but I pray that out of God's glorious, unlimited resources, may He strengthen you with power through His Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power together with all the Lord's holy people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know that that love surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. So I just feel like this verse is just a constant reminder of what it looks like to become whole, to be strengthened by God, and to reach for those resources that are so available to us always. So as we close out this episode, I want you to think about some of these questions. In your closest relationship, which protector part shows up the most often? The one that pursues or the one that pulls away? What do you think? And that'll give you, and usually it's tied to your attachment style. How does your hardworking part try to earn a sense of safety when you feel disconnected? And if your hidden parts felt completely safe, what would they need to tell your partner or friend today? Yeah, if we could give a voice to those parts that we just feel like are not allowed, what if we could risk that with somebody safe and just tell them? I told someone recently how angry I was about some things. And it felt so unnatural to say because I've spent so much time feeling like anger is wrong. But that's because that's a hidden part. That is a part that For so many years, I didn't let myself feel anger or assertiveness or, just that kind of rising up when injustice happens. And I could feel my whole body exhale, my muscles soften, just being able to speak that I'm actually angry when I am, and it's no longer hidden inside, was very freeing. So I just encourage you, whatever those parts are, allow them a seat at the table, listen to them, write about them. And you'll find that the protector parts start to calm down. They'll rise up and try to take control. And if you just say, it's okay, it's safe for me to let all the parts be heard. Understanding your attachment style is the first step towards transforming survival strategies. Whether they manifest as pursuing, withdrawing, or freezing, they were born from early relational instability. Secure attachment is possible as your wise adult self learns to self-soothe and bring God's perfect love to the fearful younger parts that still feel fundamentally unworthy or unsafe. As you move towards being rooted and established in love, you can offer these exhausted parts the security they have always craved. So, in closing, may you be aware and open to everything that comes to you today, welcoming it all for your transformation.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Transforming Us podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation and that you found it helpful. If you loved what you heard, we would really appreciate if you would take a moment and leave us a 5-star review and rating. Your support helps us reach more listeners like you.
And also, don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more relationship content. Then, if you're looking to take your growth to the next level, check out our coaching services and groups at transformingus.org.
We're here to help you transform your patterns and enjoy more secure relationships.
Until next time, in the words of Raoul Shane, you do not need to do big things. Just do small things in a big way. Then transformation will follow you.